start by talking about mothers. Obviously, the clue is in the name. There's a lot of mothers in this story. So on one hand, we have Funke, who is coming to terms with the trauma of losing a much-loved mother.
Yeah.
And then we have Liv, her cousin, who is almost dealing with the trauma of living with a very difficult mother. I mean, you mentioned it in your intro there, but what made you want to explore these very different relationships and the impact it has on the girls' identities and destinies?
I think the mother-daughter bond is one of those hugely important bonds. That thing of I'm turning into my mother, which is either a good thing or a terrible thing, depending on your relationship with your mother. And sometimes I remember once a couple of years ago, I heard myself speak and my mother's voice was coming out of my mouth. It was what she would say. And I think it's almost inescapable, that bond, because I think mothers almost dictate our relationship with ourselves. And it's sort of set from a very young age. I wanted to say, I love mirrors in literature. I just absolutely adore this comparing and contrasting two characters on really simple binaries. And this is what I did. So you have one's rich, one's poor, one's white, one's black, one's an extrovert, one's an introvert. But most importantly, one has a wonderful mother who happens to be dead, and one has a terrible mother who happens to be alive. And it's kind of which is worse. So it was really, it's a device I love. And it was just fun to sort of pitch these mothers against each other and have this inherited stories and escaping the bounds. It's also, although I said it's a reimagining of Mansfield Park, Mrs. Norris in Mansfield Park is probably Jane Austen's only thoroughly evil character. And I love evil characters like Isabel in Valhalla. So it was really nice to reinvent Mrs. Norris as Margot, or as we call her at times, Maggot. And it was just fun having this really horrible, horrible mother. And the evil things she did are just, they're only outweighed by the wonderful things that Funke's dead mother gave her. So it was kind of, I know it's fun sounds like the wrong word because I even made myself cry when I was writing it, but it was kind of fun to do this juxtaposition.
Mm. And it is a very emotional read. I want to sort of share the impact it had on me. So I lost my mum very suddenly in my 20s, which was a huge shock and absolutely devastating. And reading This Motherless Land, I sort of went back and remembered getting the sympathy cards and reading, people who we didn't know and what my mum meant to them. And I think through reading This Motherless Land, I mean, I'm a mum now, I've got a little girl myself, sort of made me appreciate her legacy that I'm part. I mean, as you say, you hear your voice. I will often say things and I think, I'm so my mother's daughter. But I just wanted to thank you because I think it is really beautiful to see that in literature and have that reminder that, yes, they may not be physically with you, but that legacy is ever so important and there's a lot of comfort to be found in that. So I just wanted to say
I'm so glad
thank you.
to hear that. And grief is a horrible thing, and it does come at you at strange times. I suffered a bereavement a couple of years ago, and one of the worst things for me is when you forget and then you remember, and it's almost like grieving all over again. And I don't think that will ever go away. But you're quite right, and that has honestly warmed my heart that you got that, because I think the legacy of the people we loved is actually that grief, and somebody else, that seeing your mother or your brother or whoever reflected by someone else is heartwarming. And you can't grieve unless you love, and I would never give up love. So grief is, I know it sounds trite, but it's the price you pay.
It really is. Right, before we have me weeping into my cup of tea, let's move on from talking about wonderful mothers to the not so wonderful. I mean, you've touched very briefly on Margot,
Yes.
or Maggot. She's pretty awful. So she is racist. She's bitter. She's very self-centered. When she learns that her niece has lost her mom and is coming to live with her, she has zero sympathy at all. But she's brilliantly written and very fun to read. So I had two questions about Margot for you. One was she a difficult character for you to write, or was she a lot of fun? And the second one was, I know you talk about how much you love your characters. Were you able to find anything in Margot that you loved?
Unfortunately, yes, because I
Oh.
actually think I mean, she's a narcissist, and I did
Mm.
push her to the limits, and it was important that she remained this horrible. But I actually did in the end feel sorry for her at any rate, because she's one of those people who cannot take any responsibility for her own actions. And one of the most, sometimes that's a terrible thing that goes with privilege, when you have so much privilege that it becomes real entitlement. And
Mm.
I might not have met a Margot, and I definitely didn't meet an Isabel, but I have seen glimpses in people when they take no responsibility for their actions. They feel they are owed a living. They feel anything they don't get was because it was taken away from them rather than because they didn't deserve it. So it was quite fun to see how narcissistic I could make her. And obviously, she also feels her behavior is totally justified. She can justify what she's doing on the basis of, I love my children, I want the best for them, and therefore I'm allowed to do the most evil things in the world because I'm protecting them. And she can justify her hatred of her sister, and therefore everything to do with her sister, because her sister deprived her of what was rightfully hers, because her husband, her fiance leaving her wasn't her fault. It was because her sister went off with that black man. And whilst
Mm.
these are abhorrent, horrible things, they're not impossible to imagine. I never met my maternal grandparents, and because my mother married that black man. And I know they weren't terrible people, because I have cousins who had pretty good relationships with these
Mm.
same grandparents. So for me, they will always be bogey people. But the truth is, even horrible people have reasons in their own heads for their horror. It might not be right, it might not be justified, but so they can justify it to themselves. And in the end, I think the overwhelming feeling I have for Margot is pity, because some
Mm.
people will never ever be happy, and they sort of think that by making other people miserable they will help improve their lot, but of course they don't. So it
Mm.
was, maybe fun isn't the right word, but it was really, I do love exploring dark characters. Flaws are so
Mm.
much more fun than perfection.